November 2, 1944. Lieutenant Bruce Carr was about to die, and he knew it. His P-51 Mustang was bleeding black smoke across the Czechoslovakian sky. The oil pressure gauge had dropped to zero. Somewhere below, a German 88mm anti-aircraft gun crew was probably celebrating their hit. They had no idea they were about to become part of one of the most incredible stories in military history. 30 seconds earlier, Carr had been leading a strafing run against a German airfield. His fighter screamed low over enemy positions, his 6.50 caliber machine guns tearing into parked aircraft and fuel trucks. It was a routine mission. He had done this dozens of times before. Then the shell fragment hit. It punched through the engine compartment and severed the oil line. Without oil, the Rolls-Royce Merlin engine would seize in approximately 90 seconds. After that, the propeller would become a 400-pound anchor, and his beautiful P-51 would become a brick with wings. Carr had one option: bail out. He pulled back the canopy, rolled the dying Mustang inverted, and dropped into the freezing November sky. At 8,000 feet, his parachute deployed. As the silk canopy billowed above him, Carr looked down at what would become his prison. Or his grave. Enemy territory stretched to every horizon. He was 200 miles behind German lines. No radio. No weapon except a .45 pistol with 7 rounds. No food. No water. And winter was coming to Central Europe. The statistics were brutal. American pilots shot down over occupied territory had a 23% chance of evading capture and returning to Allied lines. The other 77% spent the rest of the war in prison camps like Stalag Luft III. Or they ended up in unmarked graves. Bruce Carr was about to become the exception to every statistic ever written about downed pilots. Because in 4 days, he wouldn't just escape. He would steal one of Germany's most advanced fighter aircraft and fly it home. Bruce Ward Carr was born January 28, 1924, in Union Springs, New York. He grew up on a farm, like thousands of other American boys. There was nothing particularly remarkable about his childhood. Except one thing. In 1939, when he was just 15 years old, Bruce Carr learned to fly. The timing matters. September 1939 was when Germany invaded Poland and World War II began. A 15-year-old farm kid in upstate New York couldn't know that within 5 years he would be dogfighting German fighters over Berlin. But some part of him must have sensed that flying was about to become the most important skill a young man could possess. He didn't learn in a military program or a formal school. A local crop duster named Earl let the kid take the controls of his biplane. One summer afternoon was all it took. Carr was hooked. By the time he turned 16, he had logged more flight hours than most Army Air Force cadets. He spent every spare moment in the air, learning the feel of the controls, understanding how an aircraft responded to his touch. On September 3, 1942, Carr enlisted in the United States Army Air Forces. He was 18 years old. When he entered the aviation cadet training program, his instructor turned out to be the same man who had taught him to fly 3 years earlier. Earl had joined up too. Earl took one look at Carr's application, saw the 240 flight hours already logged, and recommended him for the accelerated program. The kid was a natural. By August 1943, Carr was a flight officer. By February 1944, he was in England, assigned to the 380th Fighter Squadron, 363rd Fighter Group, 9th Air Force. His aircraft, the P-51 Mustang. The P-51 Mustang was the finest propeller-driven fighter aircraft ever built. Even today, 75 years later, pilots and engineers agree on this point. The numbers tell the story. Range, 1,650 miles with drop tanks. Enough to escort bombers from England to Berlin and back. Before the Mustang, no fighter had that range. Top speed, 437 miles per hour at 25,000 feet. Fast enough to catch anything the Germans flew. Service ceiling, 41,900 feet. Higher than most German fighters could operate. Armament, 6.50 caliber M2 Browning machine guns with 1,880 rounds total. Enough firepower to shred a German bomber in a 2-second burst. Before the P-51D arrived in numbers, American daylight bombing raids suffered catastrophic losses. The 8th Air Force lost 60 bombers in a single mission over Schweinfurt in October 1943. Without fighter escort all the way to the target, the B-17s and B-24s were sitting ducks for German interceptors. The Mustang changed everything. For the first time, American fighters could accompany bombers all the way to the target and back. German pilots called them the long-nosed bastards. The Luftwaffe began losing experienced pilots faster than training schools could replace them. Carr fell in love with the aircraft instantly. The cockpit fit him like a glove. The controls were responsive, the visibility excellent, the power intoxicating. He named his plane Angel's Playmate. He had no idea that in 8 months he would be sitting in a very different cockpit. One with German labels and a swastika on the tail. On March 8, 1944, Flight Officer Carr scored his first combat engagement. He spotted a Messerschmitt Bf 109 over Germany and gave chase. The German pilot tried to escape by diving for the deck, flying just above the treetops. Carr followed. The chase covered 40 miles at speeds exceeding 400 miles per hour. Both aircraft barely cleared the German forests. Carr fired. His rounds missed. He fired again. One bullet clipped the 109's left wing. The German pilot panicked. He pulled up hard and ejected. But he was too low. His parachute didn't fully deploy. The pilot hit the ground at 60 miles per hour. The 109 crashed into a hillside. Carr returned to base expecting congratulations. Instead, his commanding officer called him into the office. "Carr, that was the most over-aggressive flying I've ever witnessed. You nearly killed yourself chasing that German into the trees. You're being transferred." The kill didn't count officially. Technically, Carr didn't shoot the plane down. The pilot killed himself trying to escape. But it was the first indication that Bruce Carr didn't think like other pilots. Where others saw recklessness, he saw opportunity. Where others saw limits, he saw suggestions. In May 1944, Carr transferred to the 353rd Fighter Squadron, 354th Fighter Group, the Pioneer Mustang Group. These were the first Army Air Forces unit in Europe to fly P-51s in combat. These were the best Mustang pilots in the war. Carr fit right in. June 17, 1944, 11 days after D-Day, Carr scored his first official kill, sharing credit for an FW-190 destroyed over Normandy. 2 months later, he made second lieutenant. September 12, 1944, Carr's flight strafed a German airfield, destroying several Junkers Ju-88 bombers on the ground. On the return flight, they spotted 30 FW-190s 2,000 feet below them. Carr didn't hesitate. He dove. In the next 3 minutes, he shot down 3 German fighters. When his wingman took damage, Carr escorted him all the way back to friendly territory, foregoing any additional kills to protect his fellow pilot. He received the Silver Star, the second highest combat decoration for valor. October 29, 1944, Carr downed 2 Bf-109s over Germany. Total confirmed kills, 7.5. He was officially an ace. 4 days later, his luck ran out. Carr hit the frozen Czechoslovakian ground hard. The parachute landing wasn't gentle. His ankle twisted on impact. Not broken, but badly sprained. He gathered the silk canopy and buried it under leaves. The Germans would search for him. They always searched. He had maybe 20 minutes before patrols arrived. Carr knew the airfield he had been strafing was approximately 5 miles north. He knew the Germans would expect him to move south or west toward Allied lines. He knew his survival depended on doing something unexpected. He headed north. Toward the enemy. The logic was counterintuitive but sound. The Germans would search outward from his landing site, assuming he was running away. They wouldn't expect him to move closer to their base. And if he was going to survive, he needed supplies. Food. Water. Maybe a weapon. The airfield had all three. Day 1, Carr moved through the forest, staying off roads, traveling at night. His flight suit provided minimal warmth. His ankle throbbed with every step. He hadn't eaten in 18 hours. Day 2, he found a stream and drank. The water was cold enough to numb his throat. He spotted a German patrol 200 yards away and lay motionless in a ditch for 2 hours while they passed. His heart pounded so hard he was certain they would hear it. Day 3, the hunger became impossible to ignore. Carr was burning 4,000 calories a day just staying warm. He had consumed 0. His body began cannibalizing muscle tissue for energy. He made a decision. Tomorrow he would surrender. The Luftwaffe treated captured pilots better than the Wehrmacht or the SS aviators had a code. They respected fellow flyers, even enemy ones. Carr knew pilots who had spent time in Stalag Luft 3. They described it as boring but survivable. 3 meals a day. Red Cross packages. Letters from home. It beat starving to death in a Czechoslovakian forest. Day 4, late afternoon, Carr reached the edge of the German airfield. He positioned himself in a tree line overlooking the eastern perimeter. Through the branches, he could see hangars, fuel trucks, and aircraft. FW-190s mostly. A few Bf-109s. He planned to wait until morning, then walk to the main gate with his hands up. But as darkness fell, Carr noticed something. A revetment, a protective earth and concrete enclosure, sat 80 yards from his position. A Focke-Wulf FW-190 sat inside, partially concealed by camouflage netting. 2 German mechanics were working on the aircraft under portable lights. Carr watched. The mechanics checked the fuel level. Full tanks. They ran up the engine, the distinctive sound of the BMW 801 radial roaring to life. They cycled the propeller, checked the magnetos, ran through what appeared to be a complete pre-flight inspection. Then they shut it down, covered the cockpit, and walked back toward the main hangars. The FW-190 was ready to fly. Carr's brain began calculating. He had never flown a German aircraft. He didn't speak German. He had no idea where the controls were, how the engine started, or how the landing gear operated. But he knew how to fly. He had logged over 500 combat hours. Every aircraft had a throttle, a stick, and rudder pedals. The physics didn't change because the labels were in German. And he was looking at a fully fueled fighter aircraft with no guard. The surrender plan evaporated. The Focke-Wulf FW-190 was Germany's premier fighter aircraft. First deployed in 1941, it outclassed the Spitfire so thoroughly that the British rushed development of new variants just to compete. German pilots called it Würger, the butcher bird. Allied pilots called it Trouble. The aircraft Carr was looking at was likely an A-8 variant, the most common model in late 1944. The specifications were impressive. Wingspan, 34 feet length, 29 feet empty weight, 7,000 pounds, nearly a ton heavier than the P-51 engine, BMW 801, a 14-cylinder air-cooled radial producing 1,700 horsepower armament, 2 13mm MG, 131 machine guns in the cowling, for 20mm MG, 151 cannons and the wing's maximum speed, 408 miles per hour range, 500 miles. A deadly machine in the hands of an experienced pilot. Carr was not an experienced FW-190 pilot. He had never sat in one before. He had never even seen the inside of one. Everything he knew about this aircraft came from gun camera footage of them exploding. Carr waited until 3 a.m. The airfield was quiet. Skeleton crew on night watch. No activity near the revetment. He moved. 80 yards of open ground. No cover. If anyone looked in his direction, he was dead. Carr covered the distance in 40 seconds, staying low. His twisted ankle screamed with every step. The FW-190 was larger than he expected. The cockpit sat high, protected by 30mm armored glass. The BMW 801 engine dominated the nose. Carr climbed onto the wing. The canopy was unlocked. He slid it back and dropped into the cockpit. The first thing he noticed, he couldn't read anything. Every label, every gauge, every switch was in German. The instrument panel was a wall of incomprehensible Gothic script. The second thing he noticed, the cockpit was smaller than the P-51's. His knees pressed against the instrument panel. But the control stick fell naturally to his right hand. The throttle was on the left, same as American aircraft. Some things were universal. Carr had approximately 4 hours until sunrise. He used every minute. He traced wiring. He identified gauges by their position. Airspeed was usually top left. Altimeter top center. Engine instruments clustered on the right. He found the fuel selector, the magneto switches, the propeller control. The starter was the critical piece. In the P-51, it was an electrical system. In the FW-190, he had no idea. On the right side of the cockpit, he found a T-shaped handle with German text. The word looked vaguely like starter. He pulled it. Nothing happened. He pushed it. A mechanical whine filled the cockpit. An inertia starter, winding up like a giant toy. He let it spin for 10 seconds. 20 seconds. Then he pulled the handle. The BMW 801 coughed, caught, and roared to life. The noise was apocalyptic. 1,700 horsepower at idle still sounded like thunder. Every German on the airfield would hear it. Carr had seconds. He didn't have time to find the runway. Didn't have time to check the brakes or the flaps or the radio. He shoved the throttle forward. The FW-190 lurched. The tail came up almost immediately. This aircraft was nose-heavy, eager to fly. Through the pre-dawn darkness, Carr aimed between two hangars. Ground crew were emerging, shouting, pointing. 60 miles per hour. 70. The hangars rushed toward him. At 90 miles per hour, Carr pulled back on the stick. The FW-190 leaped into the air, clearing the hangar roofs by what felt like inches. He was airborne in a stolen German fighter, 200 miles behind enemy lines. Now came the hard part. The FW-190's cockpit was a nightmare of unfamiliar systems. But Carr solved problems one at a time. Landing gear, he found a lever on the left console, pulled it. A satisfying thunk. The gear retracted. The aircraft accelerated. Compass, he identified the Euro compass, oriented himself west-southwest. Toward France. Toward Allied lines. Altitude, he climbed to 500 feet, then thought better of it. At altitude, he was visible to German radar, to German fighters, to German anti-aircraft batteries tracking everything that moved. He dropped to treetop level. 50 feet above the ground. 280 miles per hour. The Czechoslovakian forest became a green blur beneath his wings. This was insane flying. One mistake, one moment of inattention, and he would cartwheel through the trees at 300 miles per hour. But at treetop level, he was invisible to radar. He was too low for flak. He was too fast for ground troops to target. The fuel gauge showed full tanks. The FW-190 had a range of approximately 500 miles. France was 200 miles away. He had margin for error. For 45 minutes, Carr flew west. The sun rose behind him. The terrain changed from forest to farmland to the scarred battlefields of eastern France. He crossed the front lines. And that's when his problems really began. Allied anti-aircraft gunners saw what they expected to see, a German Fw-190 flying at low altitude toward Allied positions. They opened fire. 50 caliber tracers arced toward Carr from every direction. He was taking fire from his own side. He had no radio to announce himself. No way to signal that he was friendly. The Fw-190 still carried German markings. The black crosses on the wings. The swastika on the tail. Carr did the only thing he could, fly lower and faster. He dropped to 20 feet. Hedge hopping. The propeller wash kicked up dust from the roads below. French civilians dove into ditches as he screamed overhead. American soldiers fired rifles at him. Every gun in France was shooting at Bruce Carr. He later estimated that every .50 caliber machine gun in existence took shots at him during that 30-mile sprint to his home base. The Fw-190 took hits. He could hear the impacts, feel the shudders. But the German engineering held. The aircraft kept flying. Ahead, he recognized the airfield, A-66 at Orcant, France. Home of the 354th Fighter Group. He lined up for approach. No time for pattern work. No time for radio calls. The anti-aircraft batteries were already tracking him. That's when he discovered the final problem. The landing gear wouldn't come down. Carr pulled the lever. Nothing. He pumped it. Nothing. He looked for a backup system, an emergency release, anything. The Fw-190's landing gear operated on hydraulic pressure. There was a selector valve that directed pressure either to retraction or extension. Carr didn't know this. He didn't know which lever controlled the valve. He didn't know that he had been pulling the wrong handle for the last 5 minutes. Below him, the 354th's anti-aircraft crews were loading their 40mm Bofors guns. A German fighter was circling their field. They were preparing to blow him out of the sky. Carr made a decision. He was going to belly land. He lined up with the grass beside the main runway. Lowered the flaps, that lever, at least, he had figured out. Cut the throttle. The Fw-190 sank. 100 feet. 50 feet. 20 feet. The aircraft hit the grass at 90 miles per hour. It slid for 300 yards, throwing up a rooster tail of mud and debris, and ground to a stop. Carr was alive. Within seconds, the Fw-190 was surrounded. Military police, rifles raised, screaming at the pilot to get out of the cockpit. They were expecting a German. They were expecting a prisoner. The canopy slid back. A mud-spattered American in a torn flight suit climbed onto the wing. "I'm Captain Carr of this goddamn squadron." Nobody believed him. He had been missing for 4 days. He was supposed to be dead or captured. And he had just belly landed a German fighter on their airfield. The MPs kept their rifles trained on him until a staff car arrived. Colonel George Bickle, commanding officer of the 354th Fighter Group, stepped out and looked at the scene. The destroyed Fw-190. The mud-covered pilot. The bewildered military police. "Carr," Bickle said slowly, "where in the hell have you been? And what have you been doing now?" The story spread through the Army Air Forces like wildfire. The pilot who stole a German plane. The only American in the European theater to take off in a P-51 and return in an Fw-190. But Carr's war wasn't over. 5 months later, April 2, 1945, near Schweinfurt, Germany. First Lieutenant Carr was leading a flight of 4 P-51s on a reconnaissance mission. They were at 15,000 feet when Carr spotted movement above them. German fighters. More than he could count. A massive formation stacked from 18,000 to 25,000 feet. Carr did a quick estimate. 60 aircraft. Maybe more. Bf-109s and FW-190s mixed. The largest concentration of German fighters he had ever seen. He had 4 P-51s. Standard tactics dictated immediate evasion. 4 against 60 was suicide. The Germans had altitude advantage, numerical advantage, and positional advantage. Every manual ever written said, disengage and report. Get out alive. Bruce Carr had never been particularly interested in what the manuals said. He keyed his radio. Engaging. His wingmen didn't hesitate. They had flown with Carr before. They knew what he was capable of. The 4 Mustangs climbed into the German formation. What happened next was one of the most remarkable air battles of World War II. The Germans didn't expect an attack. They were flying in a loose defensive formation, conserving fuel, probably heading to intercept a bomber stream. For American fighters, climbing directly into their midst made no tactical sense. Carr used the confusion. He slipped into the back of the formation, positioned himself behind a Bf-109, and fired. The German pilot never saw him. The 109 exploded. Carr shifted to another target. An FW-190. 3 seconds of .50 caliber fire. The Focke-Wulf rolled inverted and plummeted toward the earth. The German formation began to scatter. They didn't know how many Americans were attacking. They didn't know where the fire was coming from. Carr moved through them like a wolf through sheep. Picking targets. Firing. Moving. 3rd kill. 4th kill. 5th kill. In the space of 3 minutes, First Lieutenant Bruce Carr shot down 5 German aircraft. His wingmen accounted for 10 more. 4 American pilots. 15 German aircraft destroyed. 0 American losses. When the ammunition ran out, Carr led his flight home. The surviving Germans, 45 of them, scattered across the German countryside. April 9, 1945, Bruce Carr was promoted to captain. He received the Distinguished Service Cross, second only to the Medal of Honor, for his actions on April 2. The citation read, completely disregarding his personal safety and the enemy's overwhelming numerical superiority and tactical advantage of altitude, he led his element in a direct attack on the hostile force, personally destroying 5 enemy aircraft and damaging still another. Carr became the last ace in a day in the European theater of World War II. No American pilot would match his feat before Germany surrendered. By the end of the war, he had flown 172 combat missions and accumulated 14 or 15 confirmed aerial victories, the records differ, plus numerous ground kills. He was 21 years old. The war ended. Bruce Carr stayed in uniform. He joined the Acrojets, America's first jet aerobatic demonstration team, flying F-80 Shooting Stars. The transition from propeller aircraft to jets was enormous, but Carr adapted quickly. He always did. Then Korea. Carr flew 57 combat missions in F-86 Sabres with the 336th Fighter Interceptor Squadron. He commanded the 336th from 1955 to 1956. Colonel's eagles on his shoulders. The kid from Union Springs, New York, was running a fighter squadron. Then Vietnam. Colonel Carr, now 44 years old, flew 286 combat missions in F-100 Super Sabres. Close air support. Bombing runs. Strafing missions. The same work he had done 24 years earlier, in a different war, in different aircraft. 3 wars. 3 aircraft generations. 515 combat missions total. He retired in 1973. April 25, 1998, St. Cloud, Florida. Bruce Ward Carr died of prostate cancer. He was 74 years old. They buried him in Arlington National Cemetery. Section 64, Grave 6922. Among the heroes of every American war since the Revolution. Within sight of the tomb of the unknown soldier. Across the river from the Lincoln Memorial. The headstone lists his rank, Colonel, United States Air Force. It lists his decorations, Distinguished Service Cross, Silver Star, Legion of Merit, Distinguished Flying Cross with Clusters, Air Medal with Clusters, Purple Heart. It lists his wars, World War II, Korea, Vietnam. It doesn't mention the Focke-Wulf. It doesn't mention the 4 days in the Czechoslovakian forest. It doesn't mention the belly landing with no gear. The MPs pointing rifles at his face. The commanding officer asking, "Where the hell have you been?" Some stories don't fit on headstones. There are two ways to tell the story of Bruce Carr. The first is the legend. The downed pilot who stole a German fighter from an active airfield, figured out the controls by trial and error, and flew 200 miles back to Allied territory while every gun in Europe shot at him. The second is the documented record. The ace with 15 kills. The Silver Star recipient. The Distinguished Service Cross winner. The man who led 4 aircraft against 60 and won. Both are true. Both are remarkable. But here's what really matters. In November 1944, an American pilot found himself alone, unarmed, and stranded 200 miles behind enemy lines. The rational choice was surrender. The safe choice was giving up. Bruce Carr chose differently. He looked at a German fighter aircraft covered in unfamiliar instruments and saw not an obstacle, but an opportunity. He climbed into a cockpit he had never seen, started an engine he had never operated, and flew an aircraft he had never touched before. Not because he was reckless. Because he refused to accept that his options were limited to the ones that seemed possible. 4 months later, faced with 60 enemy fighters and 4 friendly aircraft, he made the same calculation. The rational choice was retreat. The safe choice was survival. He chose attack. And 15 German pilots never made it home. In 1997, a year before his death, Colonel Carr flew one more time. Kermit Weeks's Fantasy of Flight Museum in Florida had invited him for an air show. Carr, now 73, arrived in a P-51D Mustang. His own aircraft, maintained in flying condition. He came in over the crowd at 300 knots, 50 feet off the deck. The same approach he had used 50 years earlier, flying a stolen Focke-Wulf into a French airfield while his own side tried to shoot him down. Some things apparently never change. The crowd watched a 73-year-old man throw a World War II fighter through maneuvers that would challenge pilots half his age. Loops rolls. High G turns that pressed him into his seat at forces that would gray out younger men. When he landed, someone asked him what he was thinking up there. He shrugged. Same thing I was always thinking. What's the airplane capable of? What am I capable of? Let's find out. That's the Bruce Carr story. Not the stolen fighter. Not the 15 kills. Not the 3 wars and 515 combat missions. The story is simpler than that. The story is about a pilot who looked at impossible odds and asked, "What else can I do?" It's about a man who refused to accept that being shot down meant the war was over for him. Who refused to accept that not knowing German meant he couldn't fly a German aircraft. Who refused to accept that 4 fighters couldn't engage 60. Bruce Carr didn't see limits. He saw problems to solve. When his engine failed, he didn't just bail out and hope for the best. He survived 4 days behind enemy lines through planning and discipline. When he saw the FW-190, he didn't just see an impossible challenge. He saw a way home. He spent 4 hours in that cockpit, in the dark, teaching himself to fly an enemy aircraft by touch and logic. When every gun in France opened fire on him, he didn't panic. He flew lower and faster until he reached safety. When he saw 60 German fighters, he didn't see a reason to run. He saw an opportunity to protect the bombers those fighters were hunting. This is what made Bruce Carr exceptional. Not his courage, though he had plenty. Not his skill, though he was one of the finest pilots of his generation. What made Bruce Carr exceptional was his refusal to accept what everyone else accepted. That some problems don't have solutions. That some odds can't be beaten. That some things simply can't be done. He looked at the impossible and asked, why not? And then he did it anyway. That's the story worth remembering. Not because it's extraordinary, though it is. But because it's a reminder that sometimes the difference between giving up and succeeding is simply asking yourself one more time, what else can I do? Bruce Carr asked that question in a frozen Czechoslovakian forest in November 1944. He asked it in the cockpit of a German fighter he had never flown. He asked it facing 60 enemy aircraft with only 3 wingmen beside him. And every time, he found an answer. That's not just a war story. That's a lesson about how to live. Colonel Bruce Ward Carr, United States Air Force. January 28, 1924 to April 25, 1998. What's the airplane capable of? What am I capable of? Let's find out.